Hi, I'm Mary Helen, Jeruzal, and we kind of joked a little bit a while ago about my name. It is very Polish and probably was Jeruzalski once upon a time. If you remember back during Lech Walesa days and Solidarity movement, there was a general Jeruzalski who was, what's his name? Who was the other guy? Lech Walesa's nemesis. Going online, I'm going, this guy's name really looks awful familiar. And did a little bit of looking, and he was born and raised in an area that had been Prussia. I have naturalization documents signed by the Tsar of Prussia.
Wow.
So, you know, it's kind of like, is this guy, I don't know if he's still alive, is he, you know, sure tell a relative of mine or what, you know? So anyway, very Polish, grew up in Detroit, born and raised in Detroit, not a suburb. And my journey to what I do as a chaplain has been long and varied, as I shared with Pastor one time. We had a wonderful chat. Back in 1976, I had taught for a year and watched as my family argued over my grandfather's bank account, what was or wasn't there. And he was in his 90s, and I remember thinking to myself at 20, I don't want anybody fighting over me like this. So, growing up Catholic, my only other option was to join the convent, which is what I did. So I was a nun for 20 years. Left when I realized...
What order?
Franciscans from Sylvania, Ohio, outside of Toledo.
Okay.
It's a, we were a branch of the Rochester, Minnesota Franciscans.
Okay, I was in OFM.
Okay, okay. So, after 20 years and being assigned the position of administrative assistant to leadership, I knew that it was either going to make or break me, and it broke me. I realized that it was time for me to go. And so when I explain it to people, I tell them, you know, it's similar to a divorce. It hurts either way. It hurts to stay, it hurts to go. And when the pain of staying is worse than the pain of leaving, it's time to pack the bags. And that's what I did at 42. I am 64 and will be 64 in February. And I am packing bags again. Moving to Minneapolis, St. Paul area, probably next week or the week after, and jettisoning just about everything I own. So another purge, and I think, you know, God keeps purging us. What it's going to mean, I don't know, but trust in that action of God. So what we're here tonight to do is to talk about compassionate listening. And I was going to be really brave and talk for a minute and then just sit here in silence and see how long it took for everybody to get antsy. And I thought, no, everybody will fall asleep first, so I won't do that. I do have a handout, and I didn't think to bring along pens.
I can get some.
There's some back here, isn't there?
This way, and we'll scoot a couple this way.
I got some, yep.
I am very low tech. I don't do funny slides, you know, what do they call PowerPoints? You know, the brain. And I tend to be rather informal. So as we talk through the packet and talk through compassionate listening, if you have something you want to add, something you want to ask, jump at it. one of the first things I want to mention is on your second page, there's a great resource. I am a fond listener of National Public Radio. That's the only thing that's on my car radio, my house radio, NPR. And there's a program that comes on, it's called On Being, and it's run by Krista Tippett. And you can go online and just type in On Being, and it'll come up, and you get an archive of the talks that have been on her show, interviews and whatever. Powerful, powerful stuff. This woman, first of all, asks any and all listeners to explain their spiritual history. She comes at life saying, what we do is all spirit. And I don't mean churchy, but I mean spirit from what makes us human. What makes you and me who we are. One of the things that happens when we are human is we all have experiences that we come to anything in life with. And anything we hear, we filter through those experiences, be they good or bad. And sometimes they don't have a value, they just are. It's just something we've experienced, and we bounce things off of it. So, as I explained earlier, the experience of watching what was going through with my grandfather and my mom and her siblings, I picked that up as a negative. You know, here this guy's 90 years old and they're fighting over who's getting what and what's in the bank or not, and where to go, and. And I'm thinking, who is this man to you? Is he just a bank balance? Or is he a man who was a Detroit cop for most of his life? Was he the guy who got caught drinking on the job one time and they pulled his brass buttons and sent him home on a streetcar? In those days, that was a public humiliation. How did he fight back through that? How did he become a stronger man, a stronger police officer from that? Do they know those stories? Do they care? And so when I work with elders, I try to understand what brings them to this point in time. Who are they as a person? Not as an old person, not as somebody, who's disabled, but as a human being. And in order to find out who we are as human beings, we have to hear each other's stories. Our lives come out in story. I kind of get complaints sometimes that I do too much storytelling. But that's how I relate experience to experience and bring things together, is through story. And that's important part of listening. So somebody with Alzheimer's, for example, tells you for the 459th time about how, they got their first car. I heard that story, Mom. Do you have to keep repeating? I can tell you the story word for word. But it's important for that person's value to tell their own story. Because it's in that telling that they recognize who they are, who they have become, where they have come from, and where they're going ultimately. So we do have to hear the stories. Funny story about my dear mom. Now, she was not a saint. She raised 5 of us alone. But she said to me one time, she died in 99. And she said to me one time, Mary, if you want to look for my baptism certificate, don't look for it under Shirley. Well, that was her name, Shirley Mary, you know? Don't look under Shirley, you won't find it. I said, what do you mean I won't find it? She said, the old Polish tradition was grandma had the right to name the child. So my grandparents were in church with my baby mommy, and priest says, and what do you name the child? Helen and Tony says, her name is Shirley. Grandma says, no, 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 her name is Ursula. She will be called Ursula. And Ursula it is in the books. So once I heard that story, I thought, oh, this is just too good to let go of. And my mom and I were really, really close. We were best friends. And we still are. We still are best friends. And when we would go out and she would get goofy, or she would try to embarrass me, as she would, no matter how old I was, she would try to embarrass me, just because it was fun to do. I would turn to her and say, okay, Ursula, that's just enough of that. And she'd laugh and laugh. And so it was that story that brought us to a different connection, a different level. Back to NPR and On Being. David Isay is the creator of StoryCorps. And if you listen, I think StoryCorps is usually broadcast on a Friday morning. And they are broadcasts of brief stories where two people get together and have a conversation. And these conversations are recorded and they're put into Library of Congress archives. So, 100 years from now, if we still know how to archive or to reach, they'll have CDs done and gone by then, we'll be able to hear these stories. And David Isay says that listening is an act of love. It is not a passive movement. It is an active movement, just like faith. Faith is not passive. Faith is a verb. Faith is a verb. We act on faith. That is a verb. So he says that the soul is contained in the human voice. When you read a book, you have the words. But if you have a tape, if you have a CD, if you can record mom and dad's stories, you have the voice. You have a part of their soul, their spirit, what makes us human. Words make us human, but to hear them, I remember after my mom died, I had the old-fashioned tape, CD, cassette tape answering machine. And there was a message from my mom on it. I went to hit it, and I hit the erase button instead of the play button. And there went my mother's voice. I cried and cried and cried because I couldn't get it back. The funny thing is, my mother comes to me in dream, and I hear her voice. So if you have people that you've loved and they're in heaven, listen for them in dream. Listen for them in dream, and they will direct you and guide you. One of the things that's interesting about listening is that we remember the memory more than we remember the words. So if you have 2 or 3 people hearing the same thing, they're not going to absorb the same thing. They're going to hear something from and run it through their own filter. So that, 2 years from now, if I asked my brother something about what my mother may have said, he would have a totally different take on it than I would, because he comes at it from a different angle. So it's not just the words we hear, but it's the memory that's behind the word. Another story, me and my stories. Mom had pancreatic cancer. I moved home from Toledo to live with her and take care of her. Though she didn't need a whole lot of care, she prayed her pain away. But I was sitting correcting papers, and she was sitting in this chair across from me and just staring. And you know, as you're doing, what are you looking at? Do I look funny? Do I have something coming out of my nose? My spinach hanging out of my, I mean, what? And then it was, do you need something? Are you okay? Are you hurting? No, I'm fine. What are you looking at? Just you. And I'm going, poor woman. And I said, what are you doing? And she just calmly sat back in her chair and said, I'm just looking at you so I can remember what you look like. Oh. So that I can remember what you look like. That memory is as if it happened yesterday. Because of its poignancy. What was important to her was to put face and name, and that was so important to her. And when I went to bed that night, I cried myself to sleep knowing that our days were going to be limited. And she was telling me that, and she was okay with it. But that's part of the listening, I had to listen not just to her voice, but I had to listen to her body language. And I had to ask her, why are you looking at me like that? And I had to make a joke of it. But why are you looking at me? It was her way of speaking love without using words. So when we listen, we're not just listening for words, but we're listening for action. We're listening for body language. I have a patient, had a patient who, who has Alzheimer's. Brilliant man, struggling with what does it mean to die, because he was in the scientific field and he's not sure about God. Not sure about God. So he's a man who can basically say yes and no. A few words past that, but not much. Bless you. So one day I said to him, so were you able to sleep? No. Your wife tells me that you're seeing people. Yes. Are you seeing your mom? Yes. You seeing your brother? Yes. Are you seeing Dad? Yes. Does that frighten you? No. Okay, so if you're seeing your mom and your dad and your brother, what does that tell you? Don't know. Well, if you're seeing them, does that mean that maybe they're still here somehow? Or they're in the presence of what many of us call God, and they're coming to let you know that it's okay? And he with Alzheimer's, you know how they lose body trunk strength, and he's kind of slumping, and he got himself real straight. Yes! Very definitive. Yes! I said, do you believe in science? Yes. Do you believe in what you cannot see? Yes. Do you believe in energy? Oh, yes. Are we made of energy? Yes. Does energy get destroyed? No. Then if energy is neither created nor destroyed, doesn't that mean that we live on in some way? Must think. 2-word answers. But what did we get to? What did we hear? We heard he believes in some understanding of faith. He's not quite ready to call that God. Knows that there's something beyond, but he's not sure what it is. And can't quite let go of this because I'm not quite sure what's out there. But I know it's not scary. Which was a long cry from where we were 3 months ago when he was scared to close his eyes to go to sleep. That's listening. Okay? Listening is also getting down to the level of the person you're talking with. So, can I use you as an example? Do you mind? All right. You're in a wheelchair. So, if I come over to you, and I want to talk to you, and I want to say, so, how are you doing today?
Okay.
Okay? So, what's okay mean?
I don't know.
You don't know. What if I do? Hey, how are you today? You doing okay?
Yeah.
You doing okay? What's okay look like?
I don't know.
That's good. An O and a K, that's good. That's good. I'm glad you have a sense of humor. Now, if today was a really good day for you, what would that look like? What makes you happy right in here? What makes your heart happy?
Oh, I don't know.
You haven't thought of
it? Maybe.
Reading a good book. Good. What kind of books do you like to read?
I like to read W. Conger.
Oh, good writer. Yeah. Do you see the difference? If I thank you for being my guinea pig.
You're welcome.
It is so important to get to eye level. If I'm standing over, I'm an authority figure. And I'm formidable. I will admit, I'm not tiny. So I could overpower somebody just by my petiteness and lack of it. So what do? I go down to eye level. Eye to eye. Because that equalizes our space. That's another really important part of listening. Eye level. Get down to eye level. Okay? When we're speaking with somebody, I know I'm jumping all over the place, but when we're speaking with someone, the other part of speaking is the listening. And as humans, as Americans, we do not like silence. We do not like silence. We have to fill it up. We have the radio going, we have a TV going, we have to have noise around us all the time. When we're dealing with people at end of life, body-wise, physiologically, I think that's the word, it takes longer to get the brain cranked to understand what it is you're asking me or what we're talking about. Because I may have just come from, they just gave me that pill. I don't like how that makes me feel. It makes me sleepy. And then I can't talk to people. And I feel like my mouth is full of cotton. But nobody asks me about it. They just make me take the pill. Why do they make me take the pill? You know, that's a thought process that's going on. So I come in and say, how are you doing today? And go, I don't know. How am I? I don't know how to answer that. And so it takes some time to get the answer out. So we need to allow people time. And we don't need to rush their answers. So if you have 10 minutes to visit somebody, go visit them another time when you might have a half hour. Don't try to push the visit. The act of being listened to is transformative. It's transformative. If I go into a nursing facility and a CNA comes in and, hi, Mrs. Jones, I'm here to, in and out, because she has 8 patients to see. That may be the only other human being that spends any amount of time with Mrs. Jones or Smith or Susie or whatever that day. It's important that we afford people the gift of our time. We're not warehousing people, though sometimes it feels like it when you go into a facility. They are human beings with needs. They need to be touched. They need to be comforted. They need to be addressed as a human being and listened to. So you need to have the time to do it. That is a wonderful gift. It reminds them that they really matter. They really matter. By listening, we become ears to the world around us. In listening, I love this, we discover great themes of human existence. So we might hear stories over and over again, but they are not just stories. If Grandma repeats the time she got her first new car for the 100th time, there's a reason she's repeating it. Not just that her brain's going, but that meant something very important to her. I have a picture, one of those brown and white sepia type, Polaroid type pictures of my young mom standing next to her first car. And I had made a copy of it and gave it to my niece. I went through pictures once Mom died and pulled things out that they had never seen. Sent it to her. 2 years ago, I get this box in the mail, big box. Pull this big package out of this big box. And in it was a black and white and gray painting of that picture that looked like my niece had taken a photograph and enlarged it. Oh. That exact. And it's just a painting. But what it is the gift from somebody who never knew this woman. Well, no, she knew her as an older woman. She knew my mom. But she touched into that excitement of the first new car and gifted me with that memory in a new form. Powerful image, powerful gift of listening through her art. We learn about the lessons of life. We learn about generosity. We learn what, if you have people that grew up in the Depression stories. Oh my gosh, how people survived the Depression. I admire the courage that these people had to live on nothing, to spread as much as you could for as long and far as you could. And people survived it. To hear those stories gives me hope in the light of the stuff that I'm going through. And it's funny how stories cycle and repeat. Back in the day, when my mom was young, she had uncles from Manistee, Michigan, who would work in the auto industry in Detroit, come down from up north, lived with my mom and her mom and dad. And that's a small house. I mean, when I was growing up, I thought it was huge, but it was really a small house. And they gave a bedroom over to Uncle Lawrence or whomever until he found his niche. And the cycle is repeating with my brother saying, Mary, you can come to Minneapolis and live with me. You know, so things cycle back around. When we listen, time stops for everyone. It stops for me, it stops. I can visit somebody and it's an hour, hour and a half, and I've not realized it's been that long. Because I get pulled into their story. And because I'm hearing their story, they're feeling validated and valued. And that's what life is all about, that we value one another. When we listen carefully, with genuine curiosity, remarkable things happen. You see faces light up, you see eyes twinkle that didn't twinkle before because somebody bothered to listen. Somebody took the time to hear, not just with the ears, but with the heart. That's what listening is. Listening with the heart. The story of, why didn't you ever tell this story? I have a friend who is a priest in the Detroit area, has been a priest almost 40 years. When he left high school, his high school counselor told him he wouldn't amount to anything. So what did he do? He went and volunteered for the United States Navy during Vietnam. Luckily, he didn't shoot a gun, because I don't think Jerry could have ever done that, knowing him as I know him. But he was like the ship's secretary on the Intrepid outside of Da Nang. And he told stories of helicopters coming in, transferring soldiers on the ship to get them back to the States to get medical aid. And one day I said to him, why don't you talk about this? And he said, nobody asks because nobody really wants to hear the answer. When it comes to Vietnam, that's the way they were treated when they came home. It was a war we didn't subscribe to. Young men got sent over. It wasn't their choice. But when they came back home, if they came back home, they were treated like dirt. Nobody should ever be treated like that. Nobody. And how many Vietnam vets do we have in hospices or nursing facilities or, God forgive us, on the streets who have never been able to tell their story because nobody wants to hear it? That's our job as compassionate listeners, is to hear the stories, to ask the questions, to engage people non-judgmentally. And we help them hold that story. Now, what do we do with it? Well, one is find a mentor, a spiritual director, a pastor, a guide, somebody that you can share the essence. You don't want to share all the details. But when we are like a sponge, and we do that when we listen, we absorb people's stories. We get full. That can burden us. We have to take that sponge and find a safe place to wring it out so that we can go back and absorb more stories and help people feel valued. And then we take that sponge and wring it out somewhere. Journaling is excellent. If you have a therapist, that's excellent. If you have a good friend that you trust, that you can say, without telling names, I heard, and maybe not share entirely what you heard, but to say, when I left that facility today, I really felt sorrow. Or I left this meeting today and I felt so uplifted because We need to have somebody that we can share our joys and sorrows with when we are caretaking. So find yourself a buddy. Find yourself a prayer partner. Find yourself someone who is safe, that you know is not going to carry that story further. Okay? If somebody shares something with you from their deepest heart, that means they trust you. You don't ever, ever want to abuse that trust. Ever. It's a powerful thing to be a listener, but it's also a burden. And we are called to that role. We are called to that listening by the compassion that God has given us. Way back when I was a little girl, my mother would haul me off to a nursing home. We had lots of elderly neighbors. And Mrs. Smith always had a sister who was dying or needed to be fed or, you know. And that was in the 60s, because like I said, I'm 63, going to be 64. When nursing homes were not the nursing homes of today. You could smell a nursing home before you got to the front door. And my stomach just, ugh, you know, do I have to go with you to see Mrs. Smith's sister? Grumble, grumble, grouse, grouse. None of my friends had to do this. How come it's going to be? And, you know, I hated it. I hated it until I got into the door and got past the one slobbery guy who really scared me until I understood why he slobbered. And then I could get down to his eye level and tell him stories, and he would stop slobbering and he would laugh. Alzheimer's. I didn't know what that was. I didn't know what that was. What my mother was doing was teaching me compassion, teaching me what it meant to get out of my own way so that I could be available for someone else. And that's what I'm afraid so much is missing in our world, is that gift of compassion. And so, you know, if it's all possible to get youth into facilities, do it. You know, can they adopt a grandparent? I don't know how some of the facilities work. Memory care. Memory care is so difficult because you don't get any feedback. But you know, somebody who can't speak or who just mumbles words is still a person, still has a soul, and we can relate heart to heart. I would go in and sit with some memory care patients, and I would sing, Jesus loves me, and I'd get people moving back and forth. It triggered a memory. Or Amazing Grace, or Precious Lord, Take My Hand. Or one little girl, she's a woman, and I would read stories to her. And one day I was reading a story and she said, Bible! She has Huntington's disease, kind of contorted and can't speak much. Do you want a Bible story? Bible! Okay. Do you have a special Bible story? No. Bible. So, okay, how about let's do this story? Okay. So I read her Bible story. And we talked a little about it. Is that a good story? Yes. Bible. You want another Bible story? Yes. I read 4 Bible stories to her that day. She knew what she wanted and she knew what I was there for. As a chaplain, I would read Bible stories to her. Did she cognitively understand it all? I don't know, but that's not for me to know. My job, my privilege, was to share that with her. Whatever happens, happens. Often we listen for what is not said, and therein is the true story. We listen for what is not said. The twinkle in the eye, the little smile, the little nod, there are little signs people give us. So, little puppy dog says, how do you listen? So it takes eyes and ears. Maya Angelou said, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside you. Have you ever had the experience of talking and somebody starts talking over you and cuts you off? What does that feel like? Feels like what I have to say isn't important. And if what I have to say isn't important, then maybe I'm not important either. And so what do? I clam up. The story stays inside. And maybe that story is just what somebody else needs to hear to get them through their rough day. But I won't say it because somebody talked over me and shut me down. It happens all the time. Be aware of that. Be really aware of that. This sort of PowerPoint was formulated for people working in nursing facilities. And so, you know, I do the address the person by name, tell them what you're there for. Mrs. Jones, how are you today? I'm just here to visit. Is there anything that's on your mind today? Anything you want to talk about? I don't go in with an agenda. It's not my agenda. It's my patient's agenda. It's your loved one's agenda. It's your neighbor who needs to be listened to. It's their agenda. It's like what I said to your mom. What makes your heart happy today? If today was a perfect day, what would it be like to you? And maybe it is. I don't know. Maybe it's, I just want to laugh. Can you tell me a funny story? Or let me tell you, I was thinking about. Or you can ask, what might you be thinking about? What's on your mind? Don't jump in to give somebody their answer. Give them time. And then ask open-ended questions that help somebody progress to share what they need to share. It may take some time, and you may only get 2 or 3 sentences like I did with my little friend. Yes. No. Must think. You know, facial expressions. He was able to pull his body as straight as he could. I knew he knew that he was serious about what he was trying to say. It made sense to him. So watch body language. Watch body language. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and I love this quote, the first service that one owes to others in fellowship consists in listening to them. Just as love to God begins with listening to His word, so the beginning of love for the brethren is learning to listen to them. It is God's love for us that He not only gives us His word, but lends us His ear. So it is His work that we do for our brother and sister when we learn to listen to him or her. Christians, especially ministers, so often think they must contribute something when they're in the company of others. And we're the heroes. That is this one service that they had to render. They forget that listening can be an even greater service than speaking. Many people are looking for an ear that will listen. They do not find it among Christians because these Christians are talking when they should be listening. But he who can no longer listen to his brother or sister will soon no longer be listening to God either. Whew!
Wow.
Is that powerful?
Mm-hmm.
Is that powerful? He will be doing nothing but prattle in the presence of God too. You know, we have the passage in Scripture, you know, come before me in humility. You know, the rich man and the poor man. Look at me, I'm not like that sinner, God. I'm giving half all my possessions, and he's just this bum sinner back there. And then you got the little guy in the back of the church saying, oh God, forgive me, a sinner. whose prayer is more welcome before God? It ain't the braggart. It's not the braggart. This is the beginning of the death of the spiritual life. Whew! And in the end, there is nothing left but spiritual chatter and clerical condescension arrayed in pious words. Pull that sentence apart for reflection. One who cannot listen long and patiently will presently be talking beside the point and never really speaking to others, albeit he not be conscious of it. Anyone who thinks that his time is too valuable to spend keeping quiet will eventually have no time for God and his brother and sister, but only for himself and his own follies. Dietrich Bonhoeffer says a lot there. I do a lot of reading in what I do, and reflecting, and I'm finishing up my dissertation for my Doctor of Ministry. And in the process, I was reading a series of novels by Richard Paul Evans. And he writes a number of series, and one was the Walk series. And in that one book, it was The Road to Grace. He says, "This much I know, whether I accept the journey or not, the road will come. The road always comes. The only question any of us can answer is how we will choose to meet it." So you and I are going to come across a road, and we have to make a choice. How are we going to accept that? You know, this move I'm making was not something I had planned, but it is what it is, and you know, what do? I have a niece that says, "Oh, Mary, you know, you're just so, I don't know how you do this, you're just so gracious, you're so this, and you're so," and I just said, "Anna, I'm just doing what I need to do. Put one foot in front of the other. You know, I can cry about it, I can bemoan it, I can be bitter about it. It doesn't do any good. It's not going to change the situation. So I pick up, dust the feet, dust the dust off the feet, and keep going. That's all you can do." Mother Teresa said, and I did not make copies of that, "At the end of life, we will not be judged by how many diplomas we have, how much money we have made, how many great things we have done. We will be judged by, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was naked and you clothed me. I was homeless and you took me in." That's what we're going to be judged by. We're going to be judged by the Beatitudes like we heard tonight. That's what we're going to be judged by. And personally, I don't think we're going to be judged at some big grand judgment day. I don't imagine a great big Supreme Court in the sky. As I watch people go home, as I watch people die, as I'm with them when they die, I see that on their faces. I see the release, the peace, the comfort. I was with my mom when she died. I was singing "Jesus Christ is Risen Today" at 10 minutes to 2 on April 12th in the morning. 10 minutes to 2 in the morning. And she just went, and there was the most beatific smile on that woman's face. I wished I had had a camera. I knew where she was. Nobody will ever challenge that I know my mother was seeing the face of God at that very moment. Was she a saint? No. None of us are saints. We're struggling. We try. And I guess that's what a saint is, somebody that keeps trying. So then maybe she was a saint. I have in your list is a compassionate listening at the end of life references. In my books, Being Mortal. If you have a chance to read Being Mortal, or go online, And just type Atu Gawande into the web, your web search, and all sorts of conversations, interviews with him will come up, along with his books. Being Mortal is a powerful, powerful book written by a doctor about what it means to look at end of life and look at it in the perspective of being at peace, being whole, being complete, not as something to be feared. If anything, in my work with dying patients, and I'm not working with dying people, I'm working with people who are living until they die, is the question of what makes you happy, what keeps you comfortable, are you in pain? We can take care of that. What are you fearful of? Is there anything you're afraid of? Like my little friend who's afraid to die because he's not quite sure he believes that there's a God. But he believes in science. He believes in what he cannot see. Maybe between now and the time God calls him, he will recognize that he has always been in the presence of God. He was a physician. And I would talk to him about that. You know, when you helped a baby come into this world, couldn't you see God in that? Or was it just physical? I guess. Okay. So there's a kernel there. You know, it's the science versus the religion, and it's like they're one and the same. They're one and the same. So anyway, he would be great. This is the fellow that wrote, that began Stephen's ministry. Kenneth Hawk. Christian Caregiving. If you get a chance to get this book, get it. It is well worth having on your library. This is one that's moving with me. When the Dying Speak. It's another one where he talks about speaking in the sense of not just words, but the metaphorical. Had a fellow who used to work on the trains, and he kept saying, I have my ticket, I have my ticket. And his apartment was near a train rail. And the night he died, he said to his wife, when that caboose comes by, I'm on that train. When the caboose went by, he was gone. He was on that train. So words don't necessarily, I don't know how to word this. Words don't necessarily mean the physical. What is behind it? You know, so that's really important to listen to. Midlife for souls. I tell people that what I do is I'm being a midwife. Just as a midwife or a birth doula helps somebody come into the world, we are helping somebody be born into the next world. And we're not badgering. A lot of people have some really bad ideas of what hospice is about. We're not killing people. What hospice does is help families and our patients walk the journey so that they're comfortable, they're at peace, they're not frightened. And if there's something they're afraid of, you call in the chaplain. And if we can talk about it, we talk about it. If we pray about it, we pray about it. That's what this one is all about. Needs of the Dying, good one. Lessons from the Dying, another good one. The Zen of Listening. This is a phenomenal book, written by a woman who was a speech therapist and was realizing that she just wasn't, she was getting more and more exhausted. And what she was realizing is she was missing the spiritual part of helping with speech and language. She wasn't listening to her patients. She was going in with an agenda rather than having their agenda direct her treatment. So Zen of Listening is wonderful. In your packet, and we're not going to have time to go through it, but it's a little quiz on how well do you listen. And I'd suggest you sit down and kind of quiet and answer those questions. And then the scoring is a little bit odd. They give you what answers should be, so don't peek ahead, okay? Score your choices and then go back and look at the scoring and see where you come out. These are just ways to help you kind of look at what does it mean to listen. Do I, as I'm listening to somebody, am I jumping ahead and thinking what I'm going to answer them back? Or, because we do that. It is natural. Or, you know, you're listening and go, I'm supposed to meet so-and-so for coffee, you know. Do you have the time to spend with somebody? If you don't have the time to spend with them, tell them, you know, I'm running a little shy today. How about if I come back tomorrow? Would that be okay? Can we talk about this later? I have this appointment and I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to give you all the attention you really deserve. Be honest with people. They want that. They want that. This one, if you've ever had a book jump off a shelf at you, I was in the library in Memphis, going down this row of library books, putting something back, and this book was halfway off the shelf. They were all in a line. This one was. And it's The Divine Art of Dying, How to Live Well While Dying. What this is, these are Egyptian burial ships. Tibetan burial ships? One of the two. And this person recreated them and hung them as an art installation in what had been an old church, filled the floor with sand, and so people would walk through and look up at these illuminated ships from the underside. It was kind of like looking at these ships carrying souls to heaven from underside. Karen struggled with ovarian cancer for 10 years. Her friend Herbert Anderson was kind of like a spiritual guide, and they would share letters back and forth about what was going on and their decisions. And so this is like a look into their conversation. And then along the side, there's from the Caregiver's Guidebook. So there's this other little piece that says, look here, what happens when somebody says, how do you respond to that? If you're going to be working with people, just as, you know, whether it's family, whether it's people in the community, whether it's your church members, this is a very, very good resource to put your hands on. So if you get a chance to get a hold of that one, get that one. Any questions you have for me? Am I going to cover what you guys wanted to hear?
Excellent. Excellent.
I'm going to give you some quotes for reflection, and take one or two and pass them around. And I'm gonna leave these with pastors so that, you know, if people want to view the video, God help them, they'll have the paperwork to go with. I love Benjamin Franklin's quote, "While we may not be able to control all that happens to us, we can control what happens inside of us." I can be bitter, I can be angry, blah, 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 about what's recently happened in my life. What's that gonna get me other than being bitter and angry? 64 almost. When I was 10 years old, my parents split up. There were 5 of us and 5 of my father's first family. Their mother died of Lou Gehrig's disease. My mom married him thinking she couldn't have children, and then boom, here come 5 us, me and 4 brothers. And so there's 10 kids, took up a whole pew in church, you know? And it just didn't work. His mother was interfering, his first wife's family was interfering, and he didn't know how to handle it, so he just kind of took the path of least resistance, and it is what happened. So, in my life, my father would make promises that he couldn't keep, wouldn't keep, never intended on keeping, but, you know, it'll get your kids to shut up if you promise them something, so he'd make promises, and, you know, we had visitation from 12 to 5, he would be at the door at noon on the nose, not a minute before, and we were back at my grandfather's house at 5 p.m. on the nose. He wasn't going to give us a moment more of his time. And I don't exactly know why he did that, but that's what he did. So, of course, I got to be really bitter and angry about that man that called himself my father. And I shut him off, shut him down, shut him out. And I was bitter and angry, and one day I woke up and I realized, you know, I'm hurting. He's not hurting. He doesn't care that I'm angry. He doesn't care that I miss that he was never there for anything. So what am I carrying this around for? And I made the choice I was probably 30, I'm going to get to know who this man is before he dies. And it was a struggle. I'm not sure I exactly knew who he was because I think he was a chameleon. He was a wonderful con man. He would never compliment you. He might compliment you behind your back, but to your face he was very critical. And if he said to me, "You're just like your mother," I knew that was not meant to be a compliment. By putting aside my bitterness and my anger, I was able to see him for who he really was, and saw a man who certainly struggled in his own way and didn't know how to deal with everything that happened to him. He was young when he lost the woman that he loved. And nobody else could fit the bill. Nobody else could be like his first wife. Nobody else could be like the first daughter. And there wasn't big enough, he didn't have a heart big enough. He was kind of like the Grinch, you know? He didn't have a heart big enough for everybody that God put into it. And I think he died a broken man. But I at least put aside my garbage so that I could open my eyes and my heart to try to get to know him. What I got to know was not always pretty, but I know that when he died, I had made peace with him as best I could. That's all we can do in life, is make peace with ourselves and with those that God puts in our lives and do it the best we know how. We're not perfect, so we just turn to God and say, hey, fill in the void, and God does. God does. So,
Thank you very much for
you
this
are
presentation.
welcome.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome. I hope that it has filled a need for you. But certainly turn to any of these resources. There's lots online, just plenty of stuff that will help with dealing with listening and, yeah. You have a thought?
No, I just, thank you, you put some pieces of the puzzle together for me.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you.
You know,
I'm
I
glad
feel
to do that.
better after listening to you because
You
it
know-
gave me some clarity into some things in my own life,
Good, good.
so.
And you know, keep in mind that God is God and we are not. Thank God.
Yeah.
You know, that's been my mantra lately. God is God, I am not. Thank God.
Yeah.
You know, and I've been saying to other people too, I rely on a loving, forgiving God. An institution doesn't forgive. Humans have a hard time forgiving. God is forgiving. And believe me, I'm relying on that right now, big time. And so you do the best you can. You know, you try not to do harm. One of the worst things worst, I don't know, is to say to somebody, I'll be by to see you, and then don't show up. If you're running late, if you have an emergency, if you know you've got strep throat, pink eye, you know you shouldn't go to a facility or whatever to see somebody, give them the courtesy of a phone call and say, you know, could we just visit on the phone today? I'm unable to see you in person because of a health issue or, you know, whatever. Be upfront with people, honest with them. Don't let them hang. Don't let them hang. That's one of the hardest things, especially if somebody's in a facility and they're expecting you to show up. And, you know, we moved in with my grandfather. My grandfather raised 3 daughters and a son. And so at 60-some years old, another girl and 4 little guys move in. My youngest brother was still in diapers. He wasn't even a year old when we moved. And so, you know, here are these screamy kids, and my poor grandfather, God love him, you know, he would, use guys, you know, it was, you know, but it was important to listen to him, to hear his stories. It was important to let him know that, you know, I appreciated the fact that he was the father that my father couldn't be. He took time to explain to me why I couldn't get saddle shoes. Your mom is doing the best she can with what your father's doing for you guys. Give her a break, you know? Somebody talked to me about it. You know, back in those days, you know, kids were seen and not heard, and, you know, we weren't included in any of the discussion about the divorce. That wasn't part of the picture. And, you know, I thank God for my grandfather, who would every now and again say, you know, your mom is doing the best she can. Your father's not doing right by yous guys. You know, and to tell him, you know, thank you and I love you. Those are so important words. Thank you, I love you, forgive me, I forgive you. Is there anything I can do for you? Anything you need? those are the kinds of things that our loved ones need and want. They want our time. They want our time. You know, and some people, you know, I've been in some facilities where people were just not exactly the friendliest. And it's because they were fearful. I'm in this place, I don't see my kids, they don't come to visit, they don't call. What's gonna happen to me? There's a lot of fear. And if we can just alleviate that fear for somebody. You know, if you can go into a facility, you know that somebody from your community is in a facility, their family is, you know, 3 states over, find out if the family would appreciate or would want you to visit them. You know, can I visit your mom? Maybe a couple times a month. I think she might appreciate that. Is it okay with you to do that? It's not like we don't have our plates full. But you know, there are people sitting in nursing homes, they don't call them nursing homes anymore, it's assisted living facilities, healthcare facilities, and I don't know what other name they use, but they're all nursing homes. People need to know that they're important to someone. They need to know that they're important, that their stories are important, that their very being is important. You know, little old slobbery grandpa needs a hug just like anybody else does. So if we can fulfill that human spiritual need, we're going to be making life a whole lot better for people we love and care for, and hopefully sending them home to God in a much better space.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you
welcome.
very much.
You're welcome. I'm glad I could do this.